Our next storyteller, who we're so pleased, is also one of our sisters in the media. April Ryan is here to talk about her responsibility covering the White House and some of the people who got her there. April?
Thanks, Megan. Well, I'm five generations removed from slavery. My great great grandfather, Joseph Dollar Brown, was sold on the auction block in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He moved to Chadburn, North Carolina, with his wife, Laura, and the Brown family that brought him on that auction block in Fayetteville. Yes, he was enslaved, but Laura and Joseph Dollar Brown's children were free. I am a descendant of Joseph Dollar Brown and those children that he had with Laura Brown. The children, the names. He had a host of children, boys and girls, with Laura. And from that union, there was a child named Ida. Ida was my great grandmother. She had a child, two children from a union, a marriage. That union produced a young girl named Etta Viola. Etta Viola was my grandmother. And in her union of marriage, she had 14 children. And one of those little girls that she had was my mother, Mary Vivian Ryan, who I'm proud to call mom. Well, Mary Vivian Ryan wanted a little girl. She thought about and dreamed about this little girl from a young age. But when she got married, she named that child April, her oldest, a child that she had dreamed about years before. So April is my name. I am the lineage and the legacy from Joseph Dollar Brown. But my story is a story about my family, myself, and in ways we're similar to other African Americans in this nation, other African American families. But there is also a unique story to be told. My mother, Mary Vivian Ryan, she attended the 1963 March on Washington, and I was born in 1967, just months before Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. As a child, I knew America had started to improve with Black people, but I was seeing a better day than my mother did. My mother lived in Baltimore in her young adult years when she was married and had two children. But early on, she was not able to try on clothes in Baltimore shops because of Jim Crow laws. But we still had a long way to go. The first time I realized this, that things were changing, it was because I was at my grandparents' house in North Carolina. My grandparents' house in the southeastern tip of North Carolina. And I found something that I'd never seen before. I was with my family on a Sunday afternoon, a typical Sunday afternoon after church, but many Southern families do. They gather together, about 20 or so people after dinner. And we were under the carport, just regaling about life, laughter, and even the dinner that we just had. Well, a pickup truck filled with about 10 or 15 white men drove down the end of the cul-de-sac. Now, mind you, I was about 9 years old in the late 70s at that time, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And what happened would never leave my mind. These men turned around, made a U-turn, coming back to our family home. And one of the men, clad in overalls, raised a rifle, pointed it at my family. Well, that moment has forever changed my life. That moment I will never forget. I was unnerved and immediately knew that racism was real and it was Black versus white. But I had never experienced something like this in Baltimore. Again, it left a mark on me forever. Well, my parents wanted to invest in me. They wanted to make sure that I didn't feel the sting of racism. They invested in my education, sending me to private school to avoid busing, forced desegregation that my mother felt would put me at risk of taunting, hurt, racism, and so much more. Now, mind you, I grew up Baptist. I was a Baptist child, but I attended a Catholic school. She wanted me there to keep me safe, to get a good education. But this also prepared me for my HBCU experience at Morgan State University in Baltimore, where I studied broadcast journalism. Oh, I was hungry to be in the business that I worked so hard for. I wanted to be in the industry and be part of it. I could breathe it, I could taste it. I wanted to be a part of it. But I always would feed stories to the National Black Network, American Urban Radio Networks, and I would get paid for those stories. Those stories were on issues of race. Those stories elevated me to the White House, to be a White House correspondent in 1997. Oh, when I first started, it was very, very intimidating. I had to calm my nerves, viewing it as a larger version of City Hall. Well, I remember my first week. It went like this. My questions raised eyebrows, as people thought I was militant because I asked questions about issues of an underserved community, the Black community, a community that didn't always get answers. I would ask about slavery, slavery apology, reparations, the Black church burnings, as well as the payments for Black farmers who were discriminated against by the USDA, and so much more. Yes, I asked questions about an America that did not get as much attention as other communities, even as race was on the president's table, well, the resolute desk, if you will. The mainstream media, the people I watched on TV and admired, viewed me as a militant, believe that or not. But those issues were never on the press briefing agenda until a crescendo moment at the White House, until they realized that I was asking questions about a community that was underserved and I didn't have an agenda. My colleagues gave me no eye contact for a while and did not embrace me into the most esteemed fold in journalism. But about 20 years later, that changed. I think of my friend, TV host Joy Reid, who says I made race an issue that's now in vogue at the White House. That's interesting to hear that. But nonetheless, at the time, people were worried about me asking questions about a community that's underserved. But race does play when it comes to the White House. How does it play? The president has it on his table. But once again, it has become vogue. But I think back to a time when the tide shifted, when people recognized I was asking questions because it was pertinent. It was about an underserved community. I think about Hurricane Katrina, when then President George W. Bush would call on me before I even raised my hand, understanding that I was asking about a community that was hurting. And I think about the years prior to that, when former White House Press Secretary Mike McCurry, who was the press secretary under then President Bill Clinton, would tell his staff, take April's questions seriously. That juxtaposed to what happened in the last couple of years. So I've been working at the White House for more than 20 years when the Trump administration arrived. I had moved to the esteemed third row, smack dab in the middle, a mark of my seniority a few years prior to their attempts to, I guess you would say, put me in my place, if you will. And this administration made its sentiments more than clear. Former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer taunted me, telling me to stop shaking my head when I was in disbelief from an answer that he gave. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, former White House Press Secretary, said my questions were ridiculous, among other things, and lied on me and about me, as Fox News made me their poster child for targets of hate that continue until this day. Well, with all this hate towards me, I had to begin to protect myself from taunts, death, and bomb threats towards me and my family. It's a sad day when a reporter in the United States has to have a bodyguard to protect her because she asks questions, probing questions that are protected by the First Amendment. Well, people came to the White House and lined that black fence waiting for me to leave my place of work to intimidate me. They stood near the fence. There was a white woman and a group of white people who would stop and look at me. I would walk, then stop again and turned around, and she would look at me, intentionally catching my eye, each time shaking her head in disapproval. I felt personally threatened and was scared. Well, there was a second time this happened. A colleague saw it, and not long after, my company hired security to be with me when I walked to and from the White House. It wasn't just about me. I had to think about my family with this residue of hate. I had to move my family because people were coming to my home as well. I bought a new house in a neighborhood of solitude and seclusion. No matter your moves for safety, your head is always on a swivel to make sure you and your children are okay. People sent letters to my job, to my home. I wasn't safe. I wasn't safe. They wanted to scare me. I just couldn't take the chance that the threats were just an attempt to scare me and be intimidation. I had to view them as warnings of something possibly serious, something possibly to come. But with that said, remember those names I said at the beginning of the story? Joseph Dollar Brown, Ida Brown Smith, Etta Viola Gowans, and Vivian Ryan. They faced racism, they faced torment, they faced hostility and death threats. And this is something that happens to Black Americans. This is remarkable only to those lucky enough not to experience it. And just as they stayed where they were, as they built good lives, as they persevered, I stand on their shoulders and I go to work undaunted. For them and my two daughters, I have to be an example. Undaunted. But because that's what we do, we go to work, we seek the truth, we report it, and we believe that when the truth of our collective humanity is felt and told, change for a colorblind society happens and racism is no more. It's not a fantasy. Knowing our strength and resolve, it will happen. Change will come. Thank you.